When the acoustic sensors pinged at dusk, Hannah Wells was already reaching for her camera. Not from excitement, from habit. 12 years photographing African predators had taught her that most alerts meant poachers long gone, evidence scattered, and another case file gathering dust in some ranger station. She was wrong about this one. The patrol vehicle jolted over the rutted track leading into Mara North Conservancy, suspension groaning as Joseph, the lead ranger, pushed the accelerator harder than usual. Hannah braced herself against the roll bar in the back, one hand steadying her telephoto lens, the other gripping the frame as acacia thorns whipped past in the fading light. 2 other rangers sat silent beside her, rifles across their laps, eyes scanning the darkening grassland. "How close?" she asked. 2 kilometers, maybe less. Joseph's voice was tight. 3 shots detected. Interval pattern suggests hunting, not warning fire. Hannah had heard that tone before. It meant something was already dead or about to be. The Conservancy had lost 3 lions in 6 weeks. 2 males taken for their manes, trophies worth tens of thousands of dollars to the right buyer. 1 nursing lioness found with her skull shattered, cubs scattered and starving nearby. The syndicates were getting bolder, slipping through patrol gaps, using acoustic knowledge against the rangers, firing when wind covered the sound, moving during shift changes. The vehicle crested a low ridge, and Joseph killed the engine. Silence rushed in, broken only by the tick of cooling metal and the distant, unmistakable sound that made Hannah's chest tighten. Hyenas. She lifted her camera, attaching the night vision adapter as the last orange band of sunset bled into the horizon. Through the viewfinder, the savanna transformed into a layered tapestry of shadow and movement, tall grass rippling, scattered whistling thorns, and there, about 300 meters downslope, a tawny shape moving with the distinctive low-slung gait of a lioness. "That's Nala," Joseph said quietly, binoculars pressed to his face. "Collar number 7. We've been tracking her for 2 years." Hannah zoomed in. The lioness was pacing, head swinging left and right, body language tight with tension. No kill visible, no blood on her muzzle. An unsuccessful hunt, then, which meant she'd be hungry, defensive, and if the pattern held. "Cubs?" Hannah asked, though she already knew the answer. Joseph lowered the binoculars. His face, normally composed after 19 years of ranging, looked drawn. 2 weeks old, maybe 3. She denned somewhere in that grass thicket. He pointed toward a dense patch of cover, about 50 meters from where the lioness paced. "We've been monitoring from a distance, trying not to disturb. But if those shots were poachers testing the area..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. A nursing lioness with hidden cubs was worth more than a male's mane to certain buyers, proof of an active pride, leverage for return visits, and if they were sick enough, cubs that could be sold, live, to private collectors who didn't ask questions. Hannah's hands moved automatically, adjusting exposure, checking battery, switching to rapid burst mode. She'd photographed death before, carcasses stripped by vultures, snare wounds, poison victims convulsing in the dirt. She'd learned not to look away, not to romanticize, not to impose human emotion onto survival's brutal arithmetic. Animals killed, animals died. Her job was to document, not to grieve. But cubs were different. Not because they were innocent, innocence was a human concept that meant nothing in the wild, but because they represented something harder to name, potential maybe, futures that hadn't yet been written. The hyena calls grew louder, whooping, rising and falling across the grassland like a conversation in a language Hannah had spent years learning to interpret. Contact calls usually, pack coordination, hyenas moving toward a scent, a sound, an opportunity. She swung her lens toward the sound and froze. One hyena, then two, then five more, materializing from the dusk like grey ghosts, moving in from downwind of the lioness. Their approach was cautious but deliberate, the loose formation they used when testing a competitor's kill or harassing a vulnerable predator. Hannah had photographed this dance 100 times, hyenas and lions locked in the eternal push-pull of Africa's apex carnivores, stealing each other's kills, defending territory, occasionally killing each other's young when opportunity allowed. Competition distilled to its purest form. "Here we go," she murmured, centering the frame. This was the story she knew. Lioness distracted by hidden cubs, hyenas probing for weakness, natural conflict playing out while poachers moved through the darkness, exploiting the chaos. She'd document it all, file the images, move to the next assignment. Except that wasn't what happened. Through her viewfinder, Hannah watched the hyenas close to within 30 meters of the lioness, well within harassment range, and then stop. Not scatter, not circle, just stop. Their bodies went rigid, ears swiveling, heads turning in unison. But not toward the lioness, not toward the grass thicket, toward something behind Hannah, out in the darkness she couldn't yet see. The lead hyena, a large spotted female with a torn left ear, opened her mouth and made a sound Hannah had never recorded in 12 years of fieldwork. Low, rhythmic, a whoop that descended into a guttural rumble, repeated 3 times, then silence. "Joseph," she whispered, "what is that?" The ranger's hand tightened on his rifle. "I don't know." And that's when the acoustic sensor in the vehicle pinged again. Closer this time. Much closer. Joseph's hand moved to the ignition but stopped. "Lights will give us away," he said. "If they're close, we need position before engagement." Hannah understood the calculus. Rangers outnumbered, poachers armed with military-grade weapons, darkness favoring whoever stayed quietest. She kept shooting, her camera's shutter the only sound besides her own breathing. Through the night vision adapter, the world glowed in shades of green and black. The lioness was a bright bloom of body heat, pacing tighter circles now. The hyenas remained frozen in their strange holding pattern, 8 of them arrayed in a loose semicircle, all facing the same direction. Away from the lioness. Hannah's brain catalogued what she was seeing against 12 years of observed behavior. Hyenas were opportunists, yes, but also highly social, intelligent, organized. When they gathered like this, it meant coordination, communication, a plan. But every plan she'd ever witnessed involved prey, carcasses, or competition with other predators. This formation made no tactical sense. They were ignoring a vulnerable lioness and potentially accessible cubs, the kind of opportunity hyena clans would normally press hard. "They should be closing in," she whispered. The ranger beside her, a younger man named David, nodded slowly. "Every time I've seen this setup, hyenas move forward, test the lion, force her to choose between defending her position or retreating." But these hyenas weren't testing anything. They stood like sentries, bodies tense, ears tracking sounds Hannah couldn't yet distinguish from the wind moving through grass. Then the lead hyena, the one with the torn ear, made that sound again, the low descending whoop that didn't match any vocalization in Hannah's mental catalogue. She'd recorded hyena communication for a documentary 3 years ago, spent weeks analyzing spectrograms with a bioacoustics researcher from Berkeley. Feeding calls had a particular frequency, territorial warnings another. Alarm calls when leopards or lions approached were sharp, staccato bursts. This was none of those things. It sounded almost like a question, or a warning directed at something specific. Hannah adjusted her lens, pushing the zoom to its limit, scanning the darkness beyond the hyenas. At first, nothing. Just grass and scattered shrubs in the deeper black of the tree line 200 meters out. Then movement, 3 shapes, low to the ground, moving in a coordinated line toward the grass thicket where the lioness's cubs lay hidden. Human silhouettes made ghostly by distance and the night vision's compression of depth. One carried something long and angular across his back. Rifle. The other 2 moved with the practiced spacing of men who'd done this before. Hannah's breath caught. "Joseph, 3 men, 2 o'clock from the grass thicket, closing from the east." The ranger swung his binoculars, swore softly in Swahili, then reached for the radio. "Sierra 2, this is Sierra 1. We have visual on 3 suspects, eastern approach to target zone. We are 2 minutes out. Repeat, 2 minutes. Do not engage until we have position." The radio crackled acknowledgement. Another patrol vehicle circling from the north to cut off retreat routes. 2 minutes. In the wild, in the dark, with armed poachers and a nursing lioness and cubs caught between, 2 minutes was a lifetime. Hannah kept shooting. It was all she could do: document, record, provide evidence for whatever came next. Through her lens, the hyenas began to move, not away, not toward the lioness, laterally, sideways, repositioning themselves, stepping carefully, maintaining their loose semicircle but shifting its orientation. Hannah's pulse hammered in her temples as she realized what she was seeing. The hyenas were moving to place themselves between the approaching men and the grass thicket. "No," she heard herself say. "No, that's not—" "What?" Joseph's voice was sharp. "The hyenas, they're blocking the approach line." David leaned forward, squinting. "Could be coincidence. They're just repositioning to avoid the humans, moving laterally to get out of the scent cone." Hannah wanted to believe that. Her scientific training, her entire career built on Occam's razor. The simplest explanation was usually correct. Animals didn't think strategically about human threats and third-party victims. They responded to immediate stimuli: scent, sound, visual cues, fear, hunger, territorial instinct. But even as her rational mind offered that explanation, her hands were shaking on the camera. Because the lead hyena wasn't moving randomly. She was watching the men. Head tracking their approach, body angling to match their vector. And when one of the poachers shifted left to get a better angle on the grass thicket, the hyena shifted left too. Mirroring, intercepting. The lioness, meanwhile, had gone completely still. Crouched low near the grass, body pressed to the earth, invisible unless you knew where to look. The stance of a mother sheltering young, making herself small, trusting in cover and darkness. She had no idea 3 armed men were closing to within rifle range, but the hyenas did. One of the poachers raised his weapon, the movement slow and deliberate, testing sight lines, finding his angle. The lead hyena's body went rigid, every muscle locked, her torn ear folded back flat against her skull. And Hannah, watching through a camera lens in the dying light, felt goosebumps race down both arms despite the evening heat. Because the hyena was staring directly at the rifle. Hannah had photographed predators reacting to human presence before: the wide-eyed panic of cheetahs fleeing vehicle noise, the cautious retreat of leopards melting into shadows, even the bold curiosity of young lions testing their courage against safari trucks. But she had never seen an animal lock onto a weapon itself. The hyena's eyes, reflecting green in Hannah's night vision, fixed on the rifle barrel as the poacher swept it across the landscape. When the barrel moved right, the hyena's head tracked right. When it dipped toward the grass thicket, the hyena's body tensed further, weight shifting forward. "Joseph," Hannah breathed, "are you seeing this?" The ranger's jaw was tight. "Seeing what?" The lead hyena, she's watching the gun. David made a dismissive sound. Animals don't recognize firearms as threats. She's watching the man's general position, that's all. Hannah wanted to believe that. Her scientific training demanded the simplest explanation. Animals responded to immediate stimuli, scent, sound, movement. They didn't think strategically about human weapons and third-party victims, but the hyena took 3 deliberate steps forward, placing herself on a direct line between the rifle and the grass thicket. The other hyenas were moving now too. 2 shifted left, 2 shifted right. 3 held center behind the lead female. It looked coordinated. It looked planned. "They're forming a barrier," Hannah said, voice strangled. "Repositioning," Joseph countered, but his tone lacked conviction. "Standard avoidance behavior. They smell humans, they're moving upwind. It just happens to look like—" The lead hyena made that sound again, the low, rhythmic whoop. This time, the other hyenas answered in overlapping chorus. The poachers stopped moving, clearly confused. One pointed at the lioness, barely visible near the grass. Another gestured at the hyena formation, suggesting they circle around, avoid the unpredictable carnivores. The rifleman made a decision. He shifted left to flank the position and get a clear shot. The 2 left flank hyenas shifted left to match. Hannah's brain screamed coincidence. Lions and hyenas were competitors, adversaries. Lions killed hyena cubs. Hyenas harassed lions off kills. The relationship was zero-sum, written into genetic code by millennia of competition. But her hands shook so hard, she had to brace the camera against the roll bar. "Sierra 1, this is Sierra 2. 90 seconds out." The radio crackled. The rifleman took a knee, weapon braced. He had his angle on the lioness. Unaware and vulnerable, Hannah kept shooting through her viewfinder. Document. Record. That's all she could do. The rifleman's finger moved to the trigger. The lead hyena charged, not at the lioness, not toward the cubs. Straight at the man with the gun. The sound that tore from her throat was pure defiance. The other hyenas erupted behind her, surging forward in coordinated wings, flanking left and right. The rifle cracked, muzzle flash white-hot in Hannah's night vision, blinding her for half a second. When her vision cleared, the hyenas were still coming. The lead female had veered but didn't retreat. She lunged again, lower, going for the man's legs, forcing him to swing the rifle barrel down, away from the grass thicket, away from the lioness. Hannah's mind was fracturing. This violated everything she knew about hyena behavior. They were opportunists, risk calculators. They didn't charge armed humans. They didn't sacrifice advantage for another predator's young. The second poacher fired. One right flank hyena stumbled, yelped, but 2 more rushed past her. The third man shouted, panic audible. He fired wildly into the air, and Joseph gunned the engine. The patrol vehicle roared to life, headlights blazing, spotlight pinning the poachers. Joseph's voice boomed through the megaphone, "Kenya Wildlife Service, drop your weapons!" The poachers broke and ran, firing twice over their shoulders. The hyenas pursued for 10 meters, then stopped abruptly, standing in that same semicircle, panting, bloodied, holding ground. The lioness never moved, still crouched, still covering her cubs, as if she understood the barrier was holding. Hannah lowered her camera, hands trembling violently. "Did you see?" she started, couldn't finish. Joseph coordinated pursuit on the radio, voice steady, but his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. David stared at the hyenas with an expression Hannah recognized on her own face. Awe. The lead hyena turned her head slowly toward the grass thicket where the lioness crouched. For 3 seconds, she stared. Then she limped into darkness, favoring her right foreleg. The others followed, glancing back, not at the rangers, at the lioness they'd just saved. The second patrol's radio report came 15 minutes later. Suspects fled into Olchiaro Forest, vehicle cache found, no arrests made. Joseph acknowledged and cut the engine. Darkness settled back over the plain like a held breath. Hannah sat frozen in the vehicle, camera in her lap, staring at nothing. "We document now," Joseph said quietly, "before tracks disappear." She forced herself to move, boots hitting dirt that still smelled of gunpowder. David was already sweeping his flashlight across the confrontation site, calling out what he found. Blood here, paw prints, disturbance pattern. Hannah raised her camera on autopilot. 12 years of fieldwork had trained her for this. Document, catalogue, preserve evidence. The rituals steadied her hands. She photographed the blood first. Dark drops scattered in an arc, then strung out in a line where the injured hyena had retreated. Nearby, deep claw marks scored the earth, the launch point of that impossible charge. "Rifleman knelt here," Joseph said, illuminating boot prints sunk deep into soil. The angle pointed directly at the grass thicket where the cubs lay hidden. Between those boot prints and the thicket, hyena tracks carved overlapping patterns, the physical record of animals positioning themselves as shields. Hannah's viewfinder framed it all, the geometry of intervention, the map of a decision that shouldn't exist in nature. "She charged across open ground," David said. 15 meters, maybe 20, against a rifle, when she could have just run. Joseph was quiet for a long moment, flashlight beam holding steady on the claw marks. "In 19 years, I have never documented hyenas defending lions. Stealing kills, yes. Harassing prides. Chang. But this?" He shook his head. "This is not in any field manual I know." They followed the blood trail into darkness until the drops faded. The spacing told a story, panicked sprint, then steadier retreat, the wounded hyena choosing survival over continued attack. Hannah lowered her camera and stared into the blackness where 8 hyenas had vanished, one of them bleeding, all of them having done something the scientific literature said was impossible. "Maybe territorial defense," David offered. "The poachers were in their range, the hyenas responded, lions just happened to benefit." But even he sounded unconvinced. The charge hadn't started when men appeared. It started when the rifle aimed at the grass. They approached the lioness carefully, voices low, giving her space to warn them off. When Joseph's flashlight finally found her, she was calm. Watching, yes. Alert, but not aggressive. 2 tiny cubs squirmed beneath her chest, safe, uninjured. "No blood," David confirmed. "No wounds. She never took fire." Because the hyenas made sure of it, Hannah thought, but didn't say aloud. Back at the vehicle, she scrolled through her camera's images. There, the moment the lead hyena locked onto the rifle. There, the coordinated fan of bodies creating a barrier. There, the charge itself, commitment without hesitation. Her hands started shaking again. Joseph radioed headquarters requesting a veterinary team for morning. Standard protocol, but nothing about tonight was standard. Hannah stared at the preview screen, at frames capturing something that violated every paper she'd ever read about lion-hyena dynamics. Competitive, antagonistic, zero-sum, not this. "I need to send these to my editor," she said, then stopped. What would she even write? Hyenas saved lion cubs from poachers? It sounded like fiction, like anthropomorphic fantasy. But the blood was real, the claw marks were real, the boot prints and the trajectories, and the wounded hyena limping into darkness, all real. She thought about the lead female, that torn ear, those eyes fixed on a rifle barrel, the decision made in a split second to charge toward death instead of away from it. For what? For cubs belonging to her species' oldest rival? The questions had no answers. Only evidence she could barely process. Joseph started the engine. "We stay until morning?" Make sure she moves the cub safely." Hannah nodded, grateful for the task. Observation, documentation, things she understood. But as the vehicle idled and the night pressed close, she couldn't stop seeing it. 8 hyenas standing between armed men and a helpless family, choosing risk over retreat, choosing something her career had never prepared her to name. Somewhere in the darkness, a single hyena whooped. The sound carried across the plain like a question, waiting for an answer. No one knew how to give. They stayed through the night, rotating watch shifts. Joseph handled radio coordination, while Hannah kept her camera trained on the grass thicket, documenting the lioness in infrared. At 3 in the morning, the lioness moved. She stood, stretched, then gently nudged each cub. Picking them up one at a time by the scruff, she carried them to a rocky outcrop 200 meters east. Better cover, better protection from future threats. Hannah tracked every step through her night vision lens, the scene rendered in ghostly green light. "Smart," David murmured. "She's relocating after the attack." Hannah was about to respond when movement at the edge of her frame made her freeze. Shapes emerging from darkness. Low, coordinated. She adjusted focus. The hyenas were back. 5 of them this time, moving in that same careful formation. The lead female with the torn ear limped slightly but kept pace. They approached to within 40 meters of the new den site, then stopped and settled into a loose semicircle. "Joseph," Hannah whispered. "Look." The ranger raised his binoculars, went rigid. "What are they doing?" "I don't know," Hannah said, though her camera was already recording. Through the viewfinder, the pattern was unmistakable. Hyenas positioned in an arc facing outward, not toward the lioness, but away from her, toward the open plain where danger might approach, like guards. "This isn't normal," David said, voice tight. "Hyenas don't protect lion dens." But the thermal scope showed exactly that. 5 hyenas maintaining watch positions around a rival predator's cubs, bodies oriented toward potential threats, not prey. The lioness emerged briefly from the rocks, scanned the perimeter, saw the hyenas. Her body tensed, the universal posture of a mother assessing danger, but she didn't charge, didn't snarl, didn't move to drive them off. She stared for 3 seconds, then retreated into the den. Hannah's hands trembled. "She saw them. She didn't attack. She just accepted them." "Exhaustion," Joseph offered. "Too tired to engage, conserving energy for the cubs." Or, Hannah heard herself say, "She knows they're not a threat." David shifted uncomfortably. "That's anthropomorphizing. Lions and hyenas are competitors. They steal kills. They kill each other's young. There's decades of research." "I know the research," Hannah interrupted. "But right now I'm watching something different." They fell silent. Minutes stretched into an hour. The hyenas shifted position occasionally, but maintained their outward-facing arc, never approaching the den, never turning away. At 4:30, dawn began to pale the eastern horizon. The hyenas stood one by one and moved off together, not scattered but coordinated, the same purposeful unity they'd shown all night. The lead female was last. She turned toward the rocky outcrop, held her position for several heartbeats, then limped after her clan into fading darkness. Hannah scrolled through her thermal footage, frame by frame. 5 hyenas, protective semicircle. Hours of sustained watch during prime hunting time when they should have been feeding or resting in their own territory. "We need specialists," she said, "because I can't explain this." Joseph was already radioing for Dr. Kamau, the Conservancy's senior ecologist. "Tell him we have priority footage, behavior that requires immediate interpretation." When the veterinary team arrived at dawn with Dr. Kamau, Hannah had her laptop ready, footage queued. "Priority interpretation?" Kamau asked, setting down his case. "Show me." Hannah pressed play. She watched his expression shift, professional interest to confusion to something like shock, as he viewed the charge, the barrier formation, the overnight vigil. When it ended, he asked her to replay it, then again. On the third viewing, he paused on a frame showing the lead hyena positioned directly between the rifleman and the grass thicket. "This angle," he said quietly. "She's blocking line of sight. Not accidentally, deliberately." "Is that possible?" David asked. Kamau removed his glasses, rubbed his eyes. "I've studied lion-hyena dynamics for 23 years, published extensively on their competitive interactions. Nothing in that research predicts this behavior." "So it's never been documented?" Hannah pressed. "It contradicts the fundamental relationship between these species," Kamau said. "They compete for resources. They kill each other's young when opportunity allows. They are ecological rivals." He gestured at the screen. "But this is interspecies defense, and I have no framework for it." Hannah looked at the frozen image, one hyena, one rifle, one impossible decision to charge toward death instead of away from it. Dr. Kamau stared at the screen for a long moment, then said something Hannah would remember for the rest of her career. "This changes what we think we know." Dr. Kamau spent 2 days reviewing Hannah's footage, cross-referencing GPS data from the lioness's collar and deploying camera traps around the rocky outcrop. On the third night, motion alerts pinged from 3 positions simultaneously. Hannah pulled up the feeds and froze. The hyenas had returned. All 8, including the injured female, whose shoulder wound showed as a dark patch in infrared. They approached the den from different vectors, converging with clear purpose. "Dr. Kamau," Hannah called. "Now!" He crossed the station and leaned over her shoulder. His breath caught. The hyenas were forming a perimeter again, tighter this time, with spacing that covered specific approach angles from the tree line where poachers typically staged. "They've adapted," Kamau said. "Look at the positioning. They're compensating for terrain vulnerabilities. That ravine mouth, that's the easiest human approach." Hannah switched feeds. Lead female at the exposed corridor. 2 younger, hyenas flanking brush cover, others filling gaps with precise spacing. Tactical, planned, impossible. "Where's the lioness?" Joseph asked, entering. Hannah toggled cameras. The lioness stood at the outcrop entrance, head raised, aware of the hyenas but not aggressive. Her body language read calm, watchful. She was letting them stand guard. For 20 minutes nothing moved. Hyenas held position. Lioness remained alert. Hannah's cameras documented a vigil that violated competitive carnivore theory. Then thermal sensors picked up movement southwest, 3 human heat signatures moving low through grass. "Poachers," Joseph said, reaching for radio. "Same vector." The hyenas reacted first. The lead female's head snapped toward the humans. She made that low whoop. Others responded instantly, shifting formation to face the threat while maintaining perimeter coverage. "They detected poachers before our sensors," Kamau said, checking timestamps. 4 seconds earlier. The men advanced, unaware. 60 meters, 50, 40. The lead hyena charged. The entire clan erupted. 3 center, 2 left flank, 3 right. Assault coordinated to create chaos. Poachers panicked, firing wild. Hyenas split, regrouped, pressed from new angles with impossible coordination. 1 man went down, tackled by 2 hyenas, who pinned him 3 seconds, then released and withdrew, not killing, neutralizing. "They're not hunting," David breathed. "They're defending." The assault forced poachers to break, abandon equipment, flee toward their vehicle with hyenas harrying but not pursuing beyond the den perimeter. When the engine roared and headlights swept away, hyenas stopped, stood in a line, watched until the vehicle disappeared, then returned to watch positions. The lioness, motionless throughout, finally moved. She stepped from the outcrop into moonlight and stood facing the hyena perimeter. For 5 seconds, Hannah counted. Predator and rivals regarded each other across 30 meters. Then the lioness turned and disappeared into the rocks. The hyenas settled and held position through the night. Hannah sat back, hands shaking. They coordinated defense again, drove off armed humans, for competitor cubs, for a species that kills their young when they can. Dr. Kamal typed rapidly, pulling research papers, behavioral databases, decades of observations. Minutes later, he stopped, removed his glasses, met Hannah's eyes. "There is no precedent," he said quietly. "Nothing in published literature, nothing in field notes from researchers I've consulted. This is interspecies cooperation between competing apex carnivores at a level never documented." "What do we call it?" Joseph asked. Kamal stared at monitors showing 8 hyenas under stars that had witnessed millions of years of competition and survival. "I don't know." Hannah looked at her screen. The frozen moment when lioness and lead hyena acknowledged each other. Ancient rivals, joined by something unnamed. She was documenting something that would either revolutionize field biology or be dismissed as coincidence by those who weren't there. But she knew the truth. It was real. She'd witnessed it. And that changed everything she thought she understood about what animals were capable of knowing, feeling, choosing. In the wild, survival was supposed to be zero-sum. Competitors didn't cooperate. Predators didn't protect rival young. Instinct didn't allow for strategic defense of another species. Yet here was evidence that all those certainties were incomplete. The hyenas had chosen, twice now, to place themselves between death and a family that wasn't theirs. Science would demand explanations. Peer reviewers would require frameworks. Journals would want theories that fit existing models. But sitting in that ranger station, watching thermal images of impossible loyalty, Hannah understood something simpler and more profound. Some behaviors transcended competition. Some bonds formed across species lines that evolution hadn't predicted. Some moments in the wild revealed capacities that textbooks hadn't catalogued. This was one of them, and she had documented every frame. At dawn, the veterinary team arrived to assess the injured hyena. Hannah accompanied them into the field, moving carefully through morning mist toward the clan's territory near a seasonal waterhole 2 kilometers from the den site. They found the injured female lying in shade near the water's edge, her clan arrayed loosely around her in what looked like protective positions. Hannah raised her camera, zoomed in, and felt her breath catch. The shoulder wound was clearly visible, clean through and through that had stopped bleeding, but what surrounded the injury made her freeze. Mud, packed carefully over the wound site like a cooling compress that reduced swelling and protected against infection. "Did she do that herself?" Dr. Amondi, the veterinarian, asked quietly. Hannah switched to burst mode, documenting from multiple angles. "Hyenas don't typically apply mud to wounds. They lick them clean sometimes, but this looks therapeutic, intentional." The clan's behavior was equally strange. Instead of typical jostling hierarchy, they maintained calm proximity to the injured female, occasionally bringing her scraps from a recent kill, allowing her to feed first, a complete reversal of normal dynamics where healthy, dominant animals always ate before injured ones. "They're caring for her," Dr. Amondi said, disbelief in his voice. Actively supporting recovery. Hannah photographed for 20 minutes. When the injured female shifted position and grimaced, clan members immediately adjusted spacing to give her room or shade. When she limped toward water, the others created a corridor, preventing jostling that might aggravate the wound. "This is cooperative nursing behavior," Hannah murmured. "I've read about it in elephants, in primates, but hyena social structure doesn't usually show this level of coordinated care." She stopped because the lead female, the one who'd charged the rifleman twice, turned her head and looked directly at Hannah, not with aggression or fear, with recognition. Hannah held the gaze through her viewfinder for 3 seconds before the hyena turned away and settled near her injured clanmate. "We should tranquilize, assess the wound properly," Dr. Amondi said, preparing equipment. "No," Hannah said firmly. "She's stable. The clan is supporting her. Intervention might disrupt what's working." The veterinarian studied the scene, then nodded. "We monitor from distance. If infection develops, we intervene." They returned to the den site. The rocky outcrop was quiet in morning sun. Joseph and David were documenting the perimeter. 8 distinct hyena trails, Joseph called. Multiple circuits over 3 nights. They're commuting, maintaining watch, then returning to their own range. Hannah crouched to examine prints. The pattern showed habitual use, not random wandering. David pointed to disturbed earth near the main approach corridor. "Fresh digging, something buried here." They excavated carefully. 10 centimeters down, Hannah's brush hit something solid. A tracking collar, GPS type, damaged, torn off during struggle, covered in dried blood. "They buried evidence," David breathed. "Hyenas took the collar from Poachers' abandoned equipment and buried it near the den." "Not cached," Hannah said, photographing the deliberate placement. "Concealed. They buried something dangerous near where they're protecting cubs that aren't theirs." The implications hung heavy in the morning air. "These hyenas are making tactical decisions," Hannah said quietly. "Strategic choices, assessing threats, coordinating responses, adapting behavior based on observed outcomes." Dr. Amondi listened carefully. "You're describing cognitive complexity beyond documented hyena behavior. Problem-solving, yes. Social intelligence, absolutely. But strategic planning across multiple encounters with awareness of another species' vulnerability?" He shook his head slowly. "That approaches primate-level cognition." Hannah looked toward the waterhole where the clan tended their injured, then back at the den where a lioness raised cubs under protection she hadn't requested. "What if what we call instinct is actually choice?" she said slowly. "What if the line between animal cognition and consciousness is not where we've drawn it?" No one answered. The evidence surrounding them, buried collar, worn patrol paths, coordinated defenses, cooperative nursing, asked questions that current science didn't have frameworks to address properly. Hannah raised her camera, photographing the den site in full morning light. Somewhere in these frames was proof of something extraordinary that would either revolutionize field biology or be dismissed by skeptics who weren't there to witness it. But she had documented it, every impossible frame. Now she just needed the courage to publish what challenged everything her profession assumed about the boundaries of animal consciousness. 3 days later, Hannah sat in a conference room at Kenya Wildlife Service headquarters in Nairobi, laptop open, facing a panel of experts she'd never expected to brief. Dr. Kamau had escalated the footage. Word had spread through conservation networks. Now she was presenting to an international wildlife crime unit, 2 behavioral ecologists from different universities, a carnivore specialist from the Smithsonian, and representatives from 3 anti-poaching organizations. The weight of their collective skepticism pressed against her like physical force. "Let's review the evidence systematically," said Dr. Sarah Chen, the Smithsonian specialist. Tone professionally neutral, but eyes sharp. "You're claiming coordinated interspecies defense between lions and hyenas, species that compete for every resource." "I'm not claiming anything," Hannah said, steadying her voice. "I'm presenting documentation of observed behavior." She pressed play on the first sequence. 8 hyenas positioning themselves between armed poachers and a lioness with hidden cubs. The barrier formation. The assault when the rifle aimed at the grass thicket. The room went silent, eyes locked on screen. Hannah let it play without commentary. Thermal imaging, night vision, multiple angles, time-stamped and GPS verified. When it ended, Dr. Chen asked to see it again. Then a third time. "The positioning," she said, pausing on the hyena semicircle. "They're oriented outward, away from the lion, not toward her as competitors would be." "Correct," Hannah confirmed, and this repeated over multiple nights. 3 documented nights, possibly more before we arrived. Dr. James Rutenberg, a behavioral ecologist, leaned forward. "I've studied hyena cognition for 18 years. They're intelligent, highly social, capable of complex problem-solving. But this requires theory of mind, understanding that the lioness has cubs she's protecting, that poachers threaten those cubs, and that intervention prevents that outcome. That's metacognition." Or, offered the crime unit commander, territorial defense that coincidentally benefited the lions. "Then why didn't they charge when poachers first entered their territory?" Hannah countered, cueing the timeline. "Poachers were in hyena range for 4 minutes before reaction. They only charged when the rifle aimed at the specific location where cubs were hidden." She played the second night's footage, adapted formation, tighter spacing, better coverage. "They learned," Dr. Kamau added. "They improved defensive strategy based on the first encounter." Dr. Chen typed rapidly. "What about the injured hyena?" Hannah switched files, showing waterhole footage, mud compress, cooperative care, priority feeding. "Hyenas show social support, behaviors," Dr. Rutenberg said slowly, "but typically within close kin groups. I've never seen therapeutic wound treatment in wild hyenas." "There's more," Hannah said, pulling up the buried collar evidence. They concealed a tracking collar near the den, the GPS collar poachers had removed. Hyenas took it from abandoned equipment and buried it at the site they were defending. The room erupted in murmurs. "That's object manipulation with apparent intent," Dr. Chen said. "It suggests," Dr. Kamau added carefully, "that hyenas recognize the collar as connected to threat, cognitive link between object and danger." Hannah's heart hammered. This was the moment. Either they'd accept evidence or dismiss her as anthropomorphizing. Dr. Chen stood, walked to the screen, examined the buried collar image. "I need to see the site personally, deploy independent camera traps, collect my own data, but based on what you've shown..." She turned to face Hannah. "This is either the most significant documentation of interspecies cooperation and advanced cognition in wild carnivores ever recorded, or there's a simpler explanation we're missing." "One more thing," Hannah said quietly. She played the final sequence. Lioness stepping from den after second defense. The 5-second moment when she and the lead hyena regarded each other across 30 meters. Deliberate acknowledgement before the lioness retreated. The room went absolutely still. "That's recognition," Dr. Rutenberg whispered. "Social acknowledgement between apex predators who should treat each other as threats." Recording this story, I realized I was documenting something that changes what we think we know about animal consciousness. If your heart is racing right now, subscribe to the channel. Real stories about the impossible are told here. Dr. Chen sat heavily. "We need to publish this. peer-reviewed, multiple co-authors, every piece of data transparent and verifiable, because if this withstands scrutiny, she shook her head. This rewrites fundamental assumptions about carnivore behavior, cognition, and interspecies relationships. It'll be controversial, one of the anti-poaching reps said. Some will call it coincidence, anthropomorphism. Let them, Hannah said, steel in her voice. I have timestamps, GPS data, thermal imaging, multiple witnesses, veterinary documentation, the buried collar, worn patrol paths showing habitual behavior. Everything is verifiable. Dr. Kamau pulled up a final image, an overlay of all 3 knights, hyena positions, creating a heat map of their defensive perimeter. The pattern was undeniable, deliberate, repeated, adapted. They chose to do this, Hannah said into heavy silence. 8 hyenas chose to place themselves between death and a rival predator's helpless young. They chose to take bullets, to risk everything for cubs that compete with their own offspring for survival. And they did it not once, but multiple times, improving tactics with each encounter. Dr. Chen met her eyes. Can you prove choice? Prove intention? No, Hannah admitted. I can only show you what happened, what they did. The rest is for science to figure out. But I know what I witnessed, and I know it was real. The room remained silent, everyone staring at evidence that asked questions bigger than any could immediately answer. Finally, Dr. Chen nodded slowly. Let's go to the field, she said. Let's see if they do it again. Hannah returned to Mara North Conservancy 6 weeks later. Dr. Chen's team had deployed independent cameras, collected data, interviewed rangers. The investigation was ongoing, meticulous, building foundation for peer review. But Hannah came back for a different reason. She wanted to see the cubs. Joseph drove her to the area in early evening light, the savannah golden and quiet. The lioness had moved her family again, natural behavior as cubs grew stronger and more mobile, but rangers knew where to find her. They spotted the pride near a cluster of umbrella thorns 1/2 kilometer from the original den. The lioness was there, sleek and alert. Beside her, tumbling over each other in the awkward play of young lions, were 2 cubs, bigger now, stronger, alive. Hannah raised her camera, photographing through the long lens. Cubs who'd survived their most vulnerable weeks because 8 hyenas had made an impossible choice. The hyenas still patrol sometimes, Joseph said quietly beside her. Not every night, but we see tracks, hear them calling, like they're checking in. Hannah lowered her camera, blinking against sudden tears. Do they interact, the lioness and the hyenas? Joseph shook his head. No direct contact, but no aggression either. They maintain distance, but it's respectful, aware, like they remember what happened. Through her viewfinder, Hannah watched one cub pounce clumsily on its sibling, missing, rolling in dust. So ordinary, so innocent, unaware that their existence defied scientific predictions about competition and survival. She thought about the lead hyena, that torn ear, that steady gaze, the charge toward armed men, the bullet wound taken in defense of young that weren't hers. Have you seen the injured female? She asked. Recovered fully, Joseph confirmed. Back with her clan. We spotted her 3 days ago hunting, no visible limp, the shoulder healed clean. Hannah felt something release in her chest, relief, gratitude, emotions that had no place in objective documentation but flooded through her anyway. As the sun touched the horizon, painting everything in amber and shadow, Hannah heard it, distant but unmistakable. Hyena vocalizations, that low whoop carrying across the grassland. The lioness's head came up sharply, ears swiveling. The cubs froze mid-play, instinct triggering alertness. For 10 seconds, nothing moved. Then the lioness made a sound Hannah had never heard before. Not a roar, not a warning growl. Something softer. A chuff of acknowledgement. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, the hyenas answered. Hannah's hands shook as she tried to capture it, knowing audio would never fully convey what she was witnessing. This was dialogue, communication between species, separated by millions of years of evolutionary divergence, united by something no textbook had predicted. When they drove back to camp, Hannah was silent, processing everything. Dr. Chen's preliminary analysis supported the hypothesis of advanced cognition and interspecies cooperation. Publication was likely within months. Her career would never be the same. But that wasn't what made her hands shake. It was the certainty that she'd witnessed something sacred, something that revealed how little humans actually understood about consciousness, choice, and compassion in the animal kingdom. Back at her tent, she opened her laptop and scrolled through 6 weeks of images, thousands of frames, the charge, the vigil, the recognition, the healing, the survival. She selected one photograph she'd never shared with anyone, the moment after the second defense when the lioness and the lead hyena had faced each other in moonlight. Two predators, ancient competitors, connected by an invisible thread of understanding that transcended species. Hannah saved it in a folder labeled simply "What We Don't Know." Because that was the truth, wasn't it? For all of humanity's research and observation and peer-reviewed certainty, there were depths to animal consciousness that remained unmapped, capacities for choice and sacrifice that didn't fit into survival models the hyenas had chosen risk over safety, chosen defense over opportunism, chosen to protect life that competed with their own. Science would analyze it, debate it, demand replicable evidence and theoretical frameworks, but Hannah knew what she'd seen. She'd seen something beyond simple instinct, the fundamental recognition that life was worth protecting, even when that life belonged to another. Especially then. If you've witnessed something in the animal world that science can't fully explain, write in the comments. Share your own experience below. Her phone buzzed. Message from Dr. Chen. Preliminary findings support your documentation. Prepare for publication process. This is going to change the field. Hannah set the phone down and walked outside into the African night. The darkness surrounded her, full of sounds she'd learned to identify over 12 years. Insect chorus, distant elephants, the bark of zebras. And somewhere out there, 8 hyenas who'd shown her that the boundaries between instinct and intention, between animal behavior and something approaching wisdom, were not where science had drawn them. She thought about the cubs playing in the dust, alive because of an impossible alliance. She thought about the injured hyena, healed and hunting again. She thought about the lioness's soft chuff of acknowledgement in the fading light. And she understood that some truths were too large for papers and presentations. Some moments in the wild revealed not just behavior, but being, consciousness, choosing compassion over competition. The hyenas had taught her that. And she would spend the rest of her career trying to help others see what she'd witnessed, that animals are not simple machines running genetic programming. They are minds, hearts, beings capable of extraordinary choice. She stood under African stars, camera in hand, forever changed by what 8 hyenas had shown her about courage, sacrifice, and the impossible beauty of life, protecting life, across all the boundaries humans had imagined. The wild was wiser than she'd ever known, and she had documented the proof.